What's up, everybody? Got a little bit of news. Left It Wall recently won Best Feature at the Pro to Post International Film Festival in Genoa, Italy. You know what's crazy? I didn't even know the film festival was based in Italy when we applied. But yeah, Left It Wall won Best Feature. We are very, very honored and humbled for the award, and thank you so much to everyone at the Pro to Post International Film Festival for including us and selecting us for this amazing honor. And you can catch Left It Wall now. It is out now. It is on a bunch of platforms: Apple TV, YouTube Movies, Google Play, Amazon, Xbox, and you can watch it for free on Tubi. Left It Wall is on Tubi. Tubi's my favorite. I got to be honest. Tubi is my favorite. It is free there, so come on. How can you go wrong? It's free. Left It Wall, Tubi, or anywhere else. But on Tubi, it's free. All right. Peace. Episode 113. Dave Chawner. Dave Chawner is a speaker, comedian, and anorexia survivor. I first met Dave at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival because we had a similar time slot and our venues were near each other. I think most people don't understand how anorexia works or even what it actually is. I include myself in this. So I wanted to learn more. Please welcome to the show, Dave Chawner. Dave Chawner, how are you? Good to see you again, buddy.
Good to see you. I mean, it's been a very long time, and it's been a hard one to get this together. So I'm very pleased to speak to you.
Yes, yeah, always a challenge with the time zone differences because you are in England, yeah. You're London.
I am. I'm in London for what it's worth. No one likes a Londoner, but yeah, I am in London right now.
I love London. I was there in September of 24 and September of 24. That's the last time I was in London. And it's always a wonderful place to go. And I love doing stand up there. It's such a wonderful place to perform. But,
do you find it different? Do you think English and British crowds are different to the States? And if so, like how?
I think sometimes, yes, it depends on where you're at and when, but generally speaking, I think that just British crowds and honestly crowds in the United States or outside of the United States in general, they're a little more attentive, if that makes sense. They're a little more engaged and they're a little more like they treat it more like a performance, if that makes sense. And I kind of like that. I kind of like the format that's more common in other parts of the world versus the United States. Like just the way that you guys, and everywhere it does it this way, except for the US, like you guys don't have table service.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why we don't do it that way. Well, I do know why. It's because of money. But it makes no sense that we do it that way. And it makes no sense that we, like on our club shows, the MC is usually the most like inexperienced comic, and then it builds from there, like the feature act, whereas you guys have like a super polished act as the MC because they're the trust of the show, and then you have the headliner. Everywhere else does it that way. It makes so much more sense to do it that way. Like I just like every now and again you'll see a show run that way here in the States, but it's because the producer does it that way. Like they just insist on it. I mean, I did a comedy show at like a little theater that's like a part of the cultural trust in the neighborhood where I live. And they had never done comedy before. They have the perfect space for it. And they were like, yeah, we're just not sure. And I was like, this is how we're going to run it. And there's a lot of people in LA who would do it totally different, but this is how we're doing it. And I did it kind of like a similar, like there was an MC did 15, and then the middle did like about 30. Then we took a break. People went to the bar. Then the MC did another 15, and then the headliner went on. So it was a little more, but yeah, anyway. So it's different, to make a long answer longer. But yeah, so are you from London? Is that where you're from, Dave?
I'm absolutely not. So I'm from the Midlands, from a little place that's actually where sort of the beer was created. So the IPA was created in my hometown. It's like the sort of heart of brewing, and that's where I kind of grew up. And then I went to university in Southampton. But I've been in London now for God, probably 13 maybe more years. But I don't think I'd ever sort of call myself a Londoner. I think the UK is so London centric, and um, yeah, I don't think I'd ever like call myself a Londoner, if for no other reason because people don't like a Londoner. But it's not where I'm from originally either. But you again, you must find this really funny, and I always find this hilarious for like UK based acts. You know, when you're sort of talking, oh, I've got to go to sort of Ipswich this weekend. Oh, it's a 3 hour journey or whatever. And then you speak to like Canadian comics, and I'm like, yeah, I get 2 flights for my
Yeah.
shows. And you're just like, that's so mad. Yeah, it's so weird to us, like how big everywhere else is.
Yeah, well, yeah. No, I know that's, and also you guys can at times travel by train and whatnot to gigs, which is incredible. That's not
Yeah.
really possible. I've only been able to pull that off once in the States, and it was for like an East Coast tour, and we were only doing like cities, so we were able to just like take trains in between the stops. But that's the only time I was able to pull something like that off, which was really cool. But yeah, you guys can just take trains and whatnot, and yeah, it is pretty amazing. Like, just I know a lot of the London comics I know, like they really just they work the weekends, you know, like because it's just there's so many places you can just get to in a weekend and whatnot, and they're always somewhere on the weekends. And there's places in the States like that too. And it's more like New York is the place where you can really do that. In LA, it's really hard to do that because the West Coast is quite fast. But yeah. But so, well, how long have you been doing comedy?
God, too long with too little success. I mean, it's so weird because I think there's a London thing. If I started it when I was in Southampton, so I'd only really gig once every sort of 4 or 5 months. So it was sort of a really slow time to get started. But then, like you say, in London, then you can easily, without breaking a sweat, gig 7 nights a week and do more than 7 gigs a week. It'd be really easy to sort of double up and stuff. But I have such an insecurity about how long I've been going because I have been going long enough to see people start after me, go on, do their Edinburgh Fringe run, win the Perrier, get their own TV show, then be disgraced and come on the down sort of slopes, and then fighting to get back up. I mean, the sort of, and I can understand how comedy boggles your mind when you, and especially people that are sort of older in the tooth than I am, of looking at all of these acts that start. I did a gig at the weekend at a very good club, and there was an act who had been in the BBC finals. And we were just talking, and I was like, yeah, I've been going for ages, man. Like, I've been going for 4 years. And I was like, are you kidding me? That is nothing. Like, put it this way, if my career was a kid, it would be drinking now. So, like, don't give me this sort of thing of like 4 years old is old. So yeah, a long time. Is it a waste of a life? Some people might say so. It's, it's one of those.
You're being humble, man, because you have a very, very impressive resume.
Wow, that's very sweet. I think this is, I don't know, maybe it's the British thing because I think I will always quite like self-effacing humor. I hate selling myself, but I also think one of the things in stand-up is because it's sort of success is not linear. You can be, and I've seen this so many times, of you can be doing TV stuff, but even now you hear people that have done TV, and younger people are like, who watches telly nowadays? I care about people who are on TikTok or Instagram, and then you can be killing it on Instagram and TikTok, but yet still certain clubs won't book you. And I think comedy is a great, being generous about it. I think comedy is a good lesson in keeping your feet on the ground, because even the greats can die very quickly, and you know, and can become hack very quickly. So I think it is a real grounding in what it takes to keep those feet on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, you never know when something new is going to sprout up. I mean, there's outlets that just didn't exist pretty much like a
Yes.
year or a year and a half ago. There's things that, I mean, I think about some of the comics that are, you know, because I think you and I are around the same age. I think about comics that are like a couple classes ahead of us where they had no, I mean,
Yeah.
how did any of them know? I mean, literally their job didn't exist when they were in the business and had a career, presumably. Like if they came down from the future and said, so in the next 5 years, you're going to be a podcaster, they'd be like, what is that?
And funnily enough, I was doing a gig with an act who I love, who I grew up watching on telly, and she was saying to me, we were in a car the other day, and she was like, when I started comedy, it wasn't a job. It was barely a kind of artful. You know, people would go to comedy clubs in cities. It certainly wasn't something you saw on TV. There were sitcoms and stuff, but she was like, the way that the idea of doing comedy as a job, like back then, is how the idea of being an influencer is a job now. People are like, that's not a job. How do you make money from that? And now it is not only a job, but exactly like you say, within that, there are podcasters, YouTubers, influencers, political satirists, and they're all sort of jobs in and of themselves in different realms. So yeah, it really is interesting to see how it's involved in such a little time.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. So let's get into some of the particulars about you. You have overcome anorexia,
Mm.
which first of all, kind of explain how that works to me exactly. And part of this is just me, you know, I mean, I remember the stuff that you're taught at the very beginning, you know, in school and stuff in health class, where that, you know, anorexia is this person who can't eat anything and they just throw up all the time. And usually it's a female that they're portraying. And I know there's a lot more to it than that.
I mean, I think you're very much ahead of the curve than we were. I mean, anorexia was a term that I'd heard in a kind of medical capacity, and I'd heard it because of certain singers that died of it. So it was always a really extreme thing. It was something that I never really heard of, and in terms of developing it was something that I never realized, and I think we need to get better at this in the mental health conversation, that there's always an implication that people that have mental health problems know that they've got a problem, and if you are living your own reality day in, day out, it's very hard to get any kind of perspective on that. Like, my dad was diabetic, and no one ever expected him to turn up to the GP and go, I think my blood glucose levels are slightly too high, and I think that might be because I'm not producing enough insulin. So what I need is this kind of form of medication. That, if anyone expected that, they'd be like, that's bonkers. Whereas with people with mental health problems, we it's sort of infer that they need to know that something is wrong. Whereas for me, the sort of the low mood, the not enjoying things, the anxiety, the social comparison, the insecurity, not only developed over time, but increased over time and became normal to me. And in the same way that it's really difficult to tell when a social drinker becomes alcoholic, I think it's very similar with food. On the other side as well, of like, you know, we all, how many times have you heard people saying things like, you know, oh, he's broken up with me, I'm going to go home and eat a tin of Haagen-Dazs or something like that. It's Food is something that we all have to engage in, and it's really difficult to tell when that balance tips. And the the honesty of it was I didn't realize that I had an eating disorder for years, like literal years, like a good 4, 5 years. And even when I did realize I had an eating disorder, really uncomfortable truth was that I enjoyed it. So I didn't want to get rid of it. And this is another thing that people don't talk about that I think we have to engage in.
So when you say that you enjoyed it, I mean, what was kind of the day to day like? Like, were you not able to hold down a meal, or were you just not eating? Like what did that kind of look like?
It's a really good question, because I think on the day to day level, perhaps I might not have enjoyed it so much. But I think, again, there's a really good comparison here with drugs. I don't think drug addicts on a day to day basis are like, oh, I love it so much, but it's kind of a comfort. It's a background thing. It's a crutch in order to lean upon. And in the same way that drugs education, I remember being in school and them all going like, cannabis is bad, cannabis is terrible, it does all these awful things, and getting out of that lesson, one of my mates going, they're idiots. Like, I'm literally going to go and smoke a joint now. It's great. And I think eating disorders are very similar in their kind of projection with that. And what I mean by that is, for me, a normal day, I would get up, first thing I do would go to the toilet and weigh myself. And if I'd lost weight, it would be a great day. If I put on weight, it would motivate me to lose more. Either way, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, it would still motivate me to lose more. And then I would drink loads of coffee. And for people with restrictive eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia, that's quite common, because coffee can give you energy without calories. And that kind of led to a whole sort of different problem. And then I would be like generally avoiding sort of social situations where there would be food. And when things got really exacerbated, I'd start sort of going home from school in order to weigh myself more, when the hunger pangs kicked in, to inspire me to sort of eat less. And I'd be exercising a hell of a lot more. And then I would be sort of counting calories quite obsessively, and so buying books. This is before the internet, really, buying books about calories and calorie counting, and always looking for ways to sort of lose weight and increase my exercise. And the truth of the matter is, it was never really about the weight. It was never really about the exercise. It certainly really wasn't about the food. It was about succeeding at something. It was about having something else there. And I think especially when I was a teenager, it's really hard, and this is why stand-up led to a kind of major relapse as well, is that in life it's very difficult to tell whether you are a success or a failure. And the thing that really bewitched me about the eating disorder was it dealt in numbers, and numbers don't lie. So whether I tried really hard or I hadn't at all, if the numbers went down, I was winning. If they went up, I was losing. And that was something that made so much sense, put everything into some sort of perspective, and gave me, when everything else felt so chaotic and tumultuous, something to cling on to be like, this is what I'm going to plant my flag in.
So was it just a matter of, oh, this is what I can control?
On a really, 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 really low psychological level, yes. On a deep psychological, at the time, I never would have said it was control. I still find it hard to kind of conceptualize it as that now. But yes, I think it is. And I kind of balk at that one word answer, because that's what people kept on telling me. But I think control can kind of manifest in so many different ways, in the same that, like, perhaps people who sexually assault, it's about power. Yet in the time while they're doing that, are they thinking I'm powerful? Absolutely not. It's a very different sort of thing. But absolutely, I would say the under all the soil, the root of it would have been, control, part of it.
So when you realized this was happening, what were kind of the next steps? Like when you realized, oh no, this is not okay. This is not healthy. I have an eating disorder. Like what happened next?
Again, I think it's quite linear, because at first everyone kept on telling me that I had an eating disorder, and I was like, well, that's their stuff, because, like, you know what, like, what I'm doing, I'm enjoying, I'm winning at it, and like, if they need some sort of little drama to deal with it, then that's fine, but that's their stuff. And it was when I was a good couple of years in, I started working at a boarding school, and it was in the middle of nowhere, and there was just pizza, pasta, chips. You ate 3 days. There was nowhere to prepare your own meal. There's no even dietary requirements back then, which is odd to think about. And it didn't have any calorie count. And I just remember how much I freaked out. And I started setting my alarm so that I could do exercise in the middle of the night. I started sort of hoarding food so that I could binge in my room. Because another common misconception about restrictive eating disorders is that people don't eat for days on end. And actually, you do. You tend to binge quite a lot in the same way that if you're cutting back on booze, you might go then on a binge and then go for, an extended period of not drinking. But then, sort of hoarding all this food led to a rat infestation. I started having nightmares about food. And that was the first time that I really thought, oh, this has got a handle on me rather than me getting a handle on it. And it was actually because a brilliant teacher said to me, look, I have been in therapy for bulimia 3 or 4 times. I realized this is a really tricky environment. Have you ever thought that you might be anorexic? That was the first time that someone asked me rather than telling me. And then it made a lot of sense. And I kind of accepted that I'd had it, but I never felt ill enough to do anything about it, which kind of meant that the whole thing went into haywire and I relied on it when I needed it. I didn't when I wasn't. And by the time I was 23, I knew that anorexia had the highest mortality rate of any mental illness, with one person dying from anorexia every 62 minutes. So I knew what I was doing and I tried to speed that up. And I started writing letters for like when I was gone, and so that my niece could see me, and started recording videos so that when this journey had taken its kind of final destination, then there would be something left. And the only thing really that made me engage in treatment was a really exacerbated nurse. I'd gone to the GP for depression and I'd played the system and stayed out of inpatient treatment, and I turned it down 4 times. And this nurse said, look, bottom line, mate, you wouldn't expect your laptop to work when you don't charge it. Why do you expect your brain to release any feel-good chemicals when you're not feeding it? And that made me realize the impact this has in a more kind of holistic way. And I really had to go and think about it, because I genuinely, honestly, hand on heart, didn't think I would hit 35. I didn't think I would be around. And I was like, wow. And the idea of actually living was was really confronting, because I was like, God, I haven't actually prepared for this. And then I did, and I had wonderful treatment, but it took a long time to get there.
So how would you define anorexia in your own words? Because I think a lot of people just don't understand exactly what it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's the golden question. I mean, generally, eating disorders can be grouped into 3 main parts. You've got anorexia, bulimia, and one called Ednos. Now, anorexia actually only makes up for about 10% of eating disorders, and anorexia is generally understood to be about restricting, is about abstaining from food and sometimes drink as well, in order to have this obsession about weight, etc. Then you've got your bulimia, which makes up for about 40% of eating disorders, and that is symptomized by a kind of generally binge purge or purging thing. So you eat food and then you get rid of it in various different ways, either immediately afterwards or through other means and methods. But then EDNOS, which stands for eating disorders not otherwise specified, that actually makes up for about 50% of eating disorders, and it doesn't get half as near of the attention. And EDNOS can be any sort of eating disorder. So that could be obsessive overeating. It can be things such as ARFID, which is where people don't like eating things of different textures. So there's a lot of research going into autism and eating disorders as well, of people sort of having that texture related problem there. So those are the main 3 groupings, but I think underpinning it all, it's about the relationship that you have to food and eating, and when, sort of how you're using that in order to perhaps gain control or maintain some sort of control.
So what do you think are some of the kind of stigmas around these issues? Like, what might prevent somebody from seeking help? What might make somebody feel like, oh, nothing's wrong? Like what are some of the kind of common stigmas that you see in the world? What are some popular misconceptions that people have?
I mean, misconceptions are fascinating. Like, for example, yes, you said it earlier on that anorexia might be seen actually as a female disease, but the very first ever medical case of anorexia was a man. And another misconception is that it's a modern thing. And the very first medical case of anorexia was not only a man, but it was in the 1600s. And people like Mary Queen of Scots had by what today would be called anorexia nervosa. Lord Byron had what would be called anorexia nervosa by today's standards as well. So there's loads of misconceptions there. And I think there's definitely still stigma around mental health and not coping. But I think one thing is not necessarily stigma, but barriers to entry. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have in the moment is this still perceiving, and I understand it, that these behaviors have to be extreme in order to warrant getting help. Someone once described to me that, you can just as easily drown in a puddle as you can in a lake. Anorexia, bulimia and EDNOS, they're not about numbers on a scale or numbers on a calorie chart. They're about the impact and the preoccupation on that person's life. And I think sometimes in the reporting, it can be seen as a diet gone wrong, etc. But it's really worth saying that one of the things that does get forgotten is they are actually a diagnosable mental illness. And I think sometimes that can really open a different sort of understanding to things like, oh, they are not a choice, because generally I don't think most people would think that you choose whether to have schizophrenia, etc. And it's the same with eating disorders. It's not necessarily, it's not something choice based.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit prior, but I was wondering if you could dive into this a little more. How did your anorexia coincide with depression? Like did they always go hand in hand, or what was the relationship there?
Again, it's really hard to uncouple because, like, the depression, I think it's like the frog in the boiling water, isn't it? If like you drop a frog in room temperature water and then put it over a heat source, and the frog won't realize that it's literally boiling alive because it happens gradually. And that's exactly the same with the depression. I think actually the depression when I went stand up full time, and I think that was partly exacerbated by this idea of, in my career, I got everything that I ever wanted in life, which on the one hand was amazing, but then on the other hand, it's very isolating. When all of my mates were free, I was working, and vice versa. It's also, again, that really difficult to tell success, because I'd hit a goal that I never dreamt that I would, that stand up would become my job. Yet I was still scrabbling around for gigs. I wasn't a household name. I certainly still aren't now. So that's really hard to sort of, I've achieved something, but there's still more to achieve. And I think that kind of felt a bit like a hollow victory. And then there's, everything within that, such as status angst, etc. And again, I didn't realize that the anorexia was exacerbating. I didn't realize that the depression was exacerbating, but it's a really common thing of that sustained low mood, that not getting enjoyment out of anything, that, and also it leads into more tricky things of, like, when you're not eating and when you're not when you are depressed, do you find it more difficult to sleep? So of course that makes everything so much worse. And then you have things like dry skin, so I was constantly scratching my legs, and I remember my sort of bed sheets being sort of quite blood stained because I would be scratching them and stuff like that. Loads of little things like that. And I think the depression was, I was getting very angry, I was getting very caustic and catty, and I just remember I remember sort of thinking, this just isn't normal, this isn't right. And underpinning that quite a lot as well, I was drinking quite heavily at that time as well, and I wanted to do something about the depression. I sure as sugar didn't want to do anything about the drink. So yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, it is interesting how I feel like in our world we are never quite satisfied because there's always more to attain to. And on one level, I don't know. I wouldn't say, and let me know if you agree or disagree with this. I wouldn't say it's completely unhealthy because I think there's something to be said for never being complicit. I think that's a good thing to always be growing, always be seeking, always being like, my best hour is going to happen next year. You know what I mean? Like I think that can be healthy, but you know, comparison is the thief of joy. Like there's also an unhealthy element to it. So would you agree with that? And if so, how do you balance such a thing?
Well, I think you just used the word. I think balance is the most important thing. Um, and I think that is the $1 million question. I'm working on a project at the moment, which I hope gets off the ground, of helping with comedians' mental health, because I think it is, I genuinely do believe it is one of the industries or one of the areas where it can sustain bad mental health for so many of the reasons and more that you outline there. But I think there are things that you can do. For example, in the UK, there's a sort of oft quoted thing called Millikan's Law. Now, there's a big comedian out here called Sarah Millikan, and she went on a podcast, and this is years ago, and people still talk about Millikan's Law. And she was saying when she started to be successful, started to go first time, she developed a rule for herself that if a gig goes well or goes badly, she can either celebrate or gloat until 11 o'clock the next day. And as soon as 11 a.m. hits, it's reset time. So if you had a great gig, absolutely go out and celebrate. Absolutely brilliant. Well done. You've worked hard. But then you reset. And if it went badly, absolutely learn from it. Gloat. Think about what went wrong. Be angry, whatever, as long as you reset the other day. And I think that there are a lot of tools like that I would love to kind of formally sit down and think, yeah, the most successful people do this and the most successful people do that. And I think one of the things that I am learning now, because you brought it up earlier on, and I think it's really important, is to try and benchmark success by parameters that you have control over. I think in stand-up, it's so easy to say, I am a success when I do that club or when I'm on that TV show. And this is why I really bulk at this idea, to be honest, of manifesting and stuff like that, because it's like, that ain't up to you. That's up to the casting director. That's up to the producer. That's up to the editor, the creative director, of whether they like you or not. And you can't really do that much to change yourself. What you can do is say, I want to write a new 10-minute bit in the next 6 months that I'm really proud of, that defines my voice, that can be a banker. And I think focusing on the things that you have control of is a really important thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because then what's going to happen is you are going to play that club, you are going to get that spot, and then you're still not going to be happy.
Yes.
Like it's like, I think about the goal. I mean, as we're having this conversation, I think about the goals. Like when I first started, like open mic started, the goals that I had for myself, and I'm just thinking, oh, if I could just be in that place, I would be so happy. And I've gotten to that place many times over, many times over, and I don't even think I knew when it happened, like until I like took a step back and thought about it.
And this is what's really, I couldn't agree more, because I think this is one of the things that is lesser taught about success. And I don't know, and I don't have the answer, how you can always strive to improve while not being disheartened that anything isn't good enough. It's like trying to chase that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, because I see mates who have been doing stand up double the time that I have, and they haven't written a new set in the time that I've been going. I
Mhm.
saw a set the other day, someone doing stuff about Friends Reunited, and I was like, that website closed in 2020, let alone when it was relevant. Um, and I don't want to, sound judgmental, but I would always want to be working and improving. But then that is a double-edged sword, that if you're always trying to improve, then that means that the goals are always going to change. And I don't know how I still don't know how you balance that out of wanting to improve while also not getting disheartened that you're like, well, there's always more to climb for.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us have the answer. Otherwise, a lot of mental health professionals would be out of a gig. But I think, but I think that the best way to sum it up, and of course, this is easier said than done for all of us, but it's like, just recognize that it's the journey, and you got to enjoy it. And I think
Yeah,
that's one of the things that brought us to this. Is it's a pretty freaking cool journey. It takes us to places we probably never would have gone otherwise. It takes us to, festivals that we get to be a part of. I think really it just comes down to that, which again, I should look in the mirror and say this every day. Like, I'm not saying like I practice this, but I try.
but I also think, and something that I've really noticed that I really dislike about myself, and I'm nervous to put publicly, but I certainly think over the last 12, 18 months, a really um, bad quality of mine is that I think sometimes when you are, um, there's a fine line between being grateful and being overawed and being kind of like naive. And I think sometimes and I've seen other people do this, have trained myself out of being exciting, out of saying, oh, God, this is cool, because I actually don't want promoters or other acts, and certainly not audiences, thinking, oh, he's just started out, he's a little bit naive and just really enjoying it. And I think sometimes you can create a kind of too cool for school kind of persona in order to combat that. Like, you're almost trying to tell people, yeah, well, I've done bigger gigs than this, sort of thing. It's
Yeah.
a weird, I don't know if that makes any sense, and
No,
I'm
I know
still
what you're saying.
so
Uh,
weird.
so trying to kind of bring it full circle with the anorexia, how does one overcome it? Like how does like what's kind of the what's kind of the overcoming of that? Like what does that look like?
I think that's, again, it's a golden question, and I think you could ask 10 people and get 10 different answers. I think I was very lucky that the resources that I had were incredible. And I feel guilty about that, because the truth of the matter is, if I'm honest, if I presented as a white middle class female with the same sort of numbers, would I have had all of the resources chucked at me? I tend to think not. So a lot of the stuff that I do is trying to pay it forward out of guilt. So I think one of the things that's really important in recovery is to create a benchmark that you are in control of what recovery looks like. And I feel further away from the disorder now than I have in a while. And again, one of the things that's really difficult about recovery is what one person says is disordered, another person would say is recovery. For example, not this last Edinburgh, but the one before, when I went to the Fringe, I decided for the first time ever I wasn't going to bring my weighing scales. I wasn't going to weigh myself once a day. Bish bash bosh. And then I came home and I put on half a stone, and I was like, Jesus, I'm the heaviest that I've been in years, and it freaked me out. So one of my recovery things now is I do weigh myself, if I can, every morning, in the morning, and then that's it. And that's what's so hard, is that actual recovery is a lot about the balance rather than the absolutes. And so I think for me, recovery has been trying to divert my attention elsewhere and trying to keep in the sort of straight and steady. But balance, I think, is one of the hardest things that you can achieve.
Well, where are you at now? Are you in a good place with it?
I think a much better place than I've been in a while. I think certainly during the pandemic it was really difficult, and it was a perfect storm for people with eating disorders because you're locked at home, you're surrounded by food, your exercise has been restrictive, and that compounded with the fact that you have anxiety about jobs and money and career. So that was, I think, quite difficult, and I think it sort of shocks me how difficult I found it. But right now I think I've got a better balance with food. I think I'm moving on to a different chapter of my life now where like actually you kind of realize you can't just eat whatever you want. Your joints start to creak and you've got to start thinking, yeah, you know what, I'm pushing 40, I've got to start thinking about things like that. So and one of the things I think is quite big this year for me is that I've quit drinking, which I think those two probably exacerbated each other quite a lot. So I still think that I'm moving forward. I still think that I'm learning. But in terms of the actual eating disorder and the anorexia, I do feel furthest away from it than I have been. But that said, only yesterday there's a group of promoters that wanted to do this Christmas meal thing, and that's still kind of like eating publicly. I still find a really difficult thing, and I try and avoid it if possible.
Is it a Sunday roast type deal? Which
Yeah, it was going out to this sort of steakhouse, and I'm vegan, so that's a terrible idea anyway. But it's also, I think I've kind of created a rod for my own back of like, I think talking quite openly about the eating disorder, I always kind of think if people see me eating that know my history, are kind of like, is this okay? And like, you know what I mean? And I've always felt uncomfortable. I think it's kind of a weird thing to do anyway. Of like eating out. I've always found that weird. And I've always been quite lucky that, I don't actually have food actually probably isn't a massive part of my life. But yeah, there's just little things I think that you kind of as you go, you're like, oh Jesus, yeah, I think that might be an abnormality.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I have for this is not in the same, but I like soup very, very hot. My soup
Right.
has to be very hot or I can't do it. And so I do not like ordering soup if I'm with a big group of people because I have to just eat it very fast because I just won't like it otherwise. So usually, I mean, if we're going out for like pho or ramen or something like that, where that's sort of part of the gig, I'll just sort of, I'll sort of get over it. But I recently, we were over with some friends. It was my wife and myself. We were with some friends of ours, and she had made chili. The girl had made chili, and I was finished when everyone else was just getting started. And so I mentioned, I'm like, we've been friends for a long time, and you've probably never seen me eat anything soup like until now. There's a reason for it.
Yeah,
there's a reason why my bowl's empty.
I think that's what's so weird about food is that I think we all have our little and again, this is why I think eating disorders are a spectrum rather than a binary of like you have and you have not, because I think everyone has like little rituals around food, little rules around food, little ways that they like to eat. And of course food can bring comfort, but it's that balance thing, isn't it? It's when comfort becomes obsession, and that is where it is a really tricky area to define.
Yeah, and for me personally too, I've done both, and I've not I've eaten to I've binged on food to kind of numb the pain, like whatever was going on in my life. And on the same token, I've also just found myself just not eating. Like a couple months ago, my cat passed away, and I noticed like for a little while, like I just was not eating much. I had like lost a little weight, and I kind of just decided I'm like, oh, I guess depression is the only diet that's ever worked for me. But nonetheless, and I didn't even notice. I was just so sad that I didn't notice I just wasn't eating a lot. And yeah, but yeah, so it is kind of like just a weird thing. Well, did you always incorporate this into your comedy? Like, has it always been there?
No, I think in the back of my mind it was always something that I wanted to incorporate comedy in, but it was like when I was going through therapy, I was also writing a solo show that I kind of committed to about the anorexia, and I just kind of realized how similar they are, not only in kind of creation, like stand up is a lot of thinking on your own. The real work can only really be done by you, and a lot of sort of trial and effort and failure, but also in the actual execution of it. Of like a lot of comedy is really just reframing bad ideas or making people uncomfortable in order to kind of like burst that bubble and then go, oh, thank God he was talking about something else. And I think even then, when I started writing the show, I was very kind of aware that like when I got into stand-up was probably when my mental health was quite worse, not the anorexia, but I'd certainly say my mood was kind of the lowest. And I used to go to this comedy club and I was obsessed with it because it was talking about dark, deep, sad topics of people being terrible with potential partners. They were talking about being poor. They were talking about being a disappointment to their parents, but they did it in a way that made you laugh. And if you could laugh, then you could cope. And that was what I wanted to do, was to be able to cope. So I think even when I started watching comedy, I was like, I really would love to use this in order to make tricky topics a little bit more palatable. I mean, that's why I think you see a lot of stand up about sex. I think it's very easy to get a laugh about sex stuff because it's one of the things that I think quite universally we think about and quite universally we can worry about and get wrong and want to say. But I think you can go either deeper than that and sort of talk about, yeah, exactly, like the shared experience of bad mental health and some of the sort of funny things that it can make you do.
So in closing here, where can people go to learn more about you?
You are too kind. Well, my website's davechawner.co.uk, so that's CHAWNER. And if you are interested in the comedy course, it's comedyforcoping.com, and it's also worth saying I'm on Instagram as well, just Dave Chawner. But yeah.
Dave, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.
That was Dave Chawner. Check out all of his stuff. Really, really powerful message and amazing content that he's building. And I thought with the holidays coming up in particular, I thought that was a good time for an episode like this. So as we embark on the holiday season, please keep these things in mind. And if you feel like you need help or if you are going down a dangerous path, please seek that out. All right. A public disclaimer over. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxon. Be sure to check out his podcast, The Bay Watching Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Please leave us a 5-star review. Tell your friends. Spread the word. Write a review on wherever you get this podcast, whichever platform you use. Please do write a review. It really helps get the word out about a still very new show. We are barely a tenth of the way through. And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, patreon.com/Ron Placone. For Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of cool perks. We do a Zoom hangout once a month. I post full stand-up clips not available anywhere else. You get 1,000 episodes before they're released to the public. And that's all for a Give What You Can level. Please help keep this show going and support us over on Patreon. Even $1 a month goes a long way. All right, 113. Superstition 13. And I guess, we already had just regular 13. Now this is 113, which that's a little wild. We're getting to the point where we're, 100 plus on episodes. I still feel like I started this show last week. I mean, Dave, I met Dave. When I met Dave, this show didn't exist yet. How about that? I feel like I was at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival not too long ago, but no, it was in 2023. This project is really making me feel how fast time goes. I hope it's, I don't hope it's still, I was about to say I hope it's still the same for you. I actually don't hope that. Time needs to slow down a little bit. It's not, it doesn't work that way. All right, we'll catch you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1,000 is doing for me, and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1,000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1,000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.